The ocean covers over 70% of our planet, yet we've explored less than 5% of it. In those dark, crushing depths where sunlight never reaches, things exist that defy our understanding. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 true stories from people who ventured into those depths and encountered something that changed them forever. These are stories that will make you think twice about what lurks beneath the waves. Story 1. The Research Vessel Encounter. Dr. Sarah Chen had been a marine biologist for 15 years, but she'd never experienced anything like what happened during her research expedition in the Mariana Trench in 2019. She was part of a small team aboard the research vessel Deep Current, studying bioluminescent organisms at depths of over 30,000 feet. "We were using the submersible Hadal Explorer," Sarah later told investigators. "It was just me and my colleague, Dr. Martinez, descending to collect samples. Everything seemed normal at first. The submersible had been designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. Its thick titanium hull was equipped with powerful floodlights and cameras to document their findings. As they descended, the familiar blue of shallow water gave way to complete blackness. At 28,000 feet, they encountered their first bioluminescent creatures. Jellyfish-like organisms pulsed with ethereal blue and green lights, creating an alien light show in the abyss. Sarah was documenting everything when Dr. Martinez grabbed her arm. "Sarah, look at the sonar," he whispered, his voice tight with concern. The sonar screen showed something massive moving beneath them. Something at least 3 times the size of their submersible, rising from depths that their instruments couldn't even measure. "Could be a whale," Sarah suggested, though she knew no known whale species could survive at such depths. As they watched, the massive shape on the sonar began to change. It wasn't moving like any marine animal they'd ever seen. Instead, it seemed to be unfolding. Like something that had been curled up was now stretching itself out. Then their floodlights began to flicker. "That's impossible," Dr. Martinez muttered, frantically checking the electrical systems. "These lights are designed to function at any depth." But the flickering wasn't random. It was rhythmic. On, off. Almost like the lights were responding to something external. Image 3. Bioluminescent patterns. Sarah pressed her face against the porthole, straining to see into the darkness beyond their failing lights. That's when she saw them. Dozens of bioluminescent spots moving in perfect formation around their submersible. They pulsed in the same rhythm as their flickering lights. "It's mimicking us," she breathed. The creatures, whatever they were, began to spiral around the submersible, their lights creating hypnotic patterns in the water. Sarah felt a strange drowsiness wash over her, like she was being lulled to sleep by the light show. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez shook her roughly. "We need to surface. Now." As he initiated the emergency ascent protocol, something slammed into the side of their submersible. The impact was so powerful it sent them spinning, their instruments going haywire. Through the chaos, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that still haunts her dreams. Tentacles. But not like any octopus or squid she'd ever studied. These were translucent, almost crystalline, and they seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. And at the center, barely visible in their dying lights, was an eye. An eye the size of their entire submersible, ancient and intelligent, watching them with what could only be described as curiosity. The ascent took 4 hours. 4 hours of terrifying silence as they rose through the crushing darkness, never knowing if those things were following them. When they finally broke the surface, both scientists were in shock. The official report listed the incident as equipment malfunction causing hallucinations due to nitrogen narcosis. But Sarah knows what she saw. She quit her job 3 months later and now works as a high school biology teacher in landlocked Colorado. "People ask me why I gave up my career," she told me during our interview. "How do you explain that there are things down there that shouldn't exist? Things that are watching us, learning from us? The ocean isn't empty. It's full of intelligence we can't comprehend." The Deep Current was decommissioned 6 months after the incident. Officially, due to budget cuts. But the crew members I spoke to tell a different story. They say the ship's sonar continued to detect massive moving shapes in deep water, even when anchored in shallow bays. Shapes that seemed to follow them wherever they went. Story 2. The Oil Rig Nightmare. Tommy Reeves was a saturation diver, one of the elite few who could work at depths where the pressure would instantly kill most people. In 2021, he was working maintenance on an oil rig platform in the Gulf of Mexico, 400 feet below the surface. It was supposed to be a routine job: inspect the support struts, replace some corroded bolts, and return to the surface. "I'd been down there maybe 2 hours, Tommy recalls, his hands shaking as he lights another cigarette. The water was murky, visibility maybe 15 feet on a good day. But I knew those rig supports like the back of my hand." Tommy was working alone in his atmospheric diving suit, a bulky but protective shell that maintained surface pressure even at crushing depths. His umbilical cord connected him to the surface, providing air, power, and communication with the dive supervisor above. That's when his radio crackled to life. "Tommy, we're seeing some weird readings up here," came the voice of Jake, his dive supervisor. "Sonar's picking up movement around the rig supports." Big movement. Tommy paused his work and activated his suit's lights, sweeping them in a wide arc around the platform. The familiar steel beams of the oil rig disappeared into the murky water above and below him. Everything looked normal. "I don't see anything down here, Jake. Could be a school of fish or debris." "Negative, Tommy. This is too big and moving too deliberately. We want you to wrap up and start your ascent." But as Tommy began gathering his tools, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A sound that shouldn't exist 400 feet underwater. Singing. It was faint at first, almost like the distant hum of machinery. But as Tommy listened, he could make out distinct melodies, harmonies weaving together in an otherworldly chorus. The sound seemed to be coming from directly below him, from the abyssal depths where the ocean floor dropped away into an underwater canyon. "Jake, are you picking up any audio anomalies up there?" "Negative, Tommy. Your comm is crystal clear." "What are you hearing?" The singing grew louder, and Tommy realized with growing horror that it sounded almost human. Like dozens of voices joined together, but distorted by water and pressure into something hauntingly beautiful and terrifying. That's when he saw the lights. Far below, beyond the reach of his suit's illumination, pinpricks of blue-white light began to appear. They moved in formations, swaying back and forth like lanterns carried by an underwater procession. As Tommy watched, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and fascination, the lights began to rise. "Jake, I need to surface now," Tommy said, his voice tight with panic. "Copy that, Tommy. Starting your ascent sequence." But as the winch began to pull him upward, Tommy felt a resistance he'd never experienced before. Looking down, he saw that the lights had multiplied. There were hundreds of them now, maybe thousands, rising from the depths like a constellation of stars. And they were following him. "Jake, something's wrong with the winch. It's like something's pulling against it." "Impossible, Tommy. Your suit weighs 1,200 pounds. Nothing down there could." The radio cut to static. Tommy was now suspended between the rig supports and the rising lights below. In the eerie silence, he could still hear the singing, clearer now. And with growing terror, he realized he could almost understand it. The voices were calling to him. Calling him by name. "Tommy." The watery chorus seemed to whisper. "Tommy, come down to us. Join us in the deep." He looked up toward the surface, toward safety, but the rig supports blocked his view. Looking down, the lights had formed a perfect circle around him, pulsing in rhythm with the ghostly singing. That's when he saw them. Shapes moving within the lights. Human-like, but elongated, with flowing hair and limbs that moved too gracefully through the water. They were pale, almost translucent, and their eyes glowed with the same blue-white light as the lanterns they carried. One of them approached his diving suit, pressing what looked like a face against his faceplate. Its mouth moved as if speaking, but the words came through the water as that hypnotic singing. Tommy closed his eyes and began to pray, repeating every prayer he'd learned as a child. When he opened them again, the creatures were gone. The lights had vanished. The singing had stopped. His radio crackled back to life. "Tommy, Tommy, respond. We lost you for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Tommy looked at his suit's chronometer in confusion. According to his instruments, only 3 minutes had passed. The ascent continued without further incident, but when Tommy reached the surface, the dive crew was shocked by his appearance. His hair had turned completely white, and his eyes held a haunted look that never fully went away. The oil rig was abandoned 3 weeks later, officially due to structural concerns, but the real reason was kept classified. Multiple divers reported the same phenomenon: singing voices, strange lights, and creatures that looked almost human but moved through the water like ghosts. Tommy never dove again. He moved inland to Oklahoma and now works at a hardware store. But every night, he says, he can still hear them singing in his dreams, calling him back to the deep. "They're still down there," he told me, staring out his window at the landlocked horizon, waiting. "And sometimes, I think they're not the only ones. Sometimes I think the ocean is full of things that used to be people. People who answered the call and joined them in the deep." Story 3. The Research Station Incident. Dr. Elena Vasquez was part of an international team studying deep-sea thermal vents at the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point in Earth's oceans. In 2022, their underwater research station Abyss 1 was positioned at a depth of 35,000 feet, suspended like a metal bubble in the crushing darkness of the Mariana Trench. The station housed 6 researchers for months at a time, studying the unique ecosystems that thrived around the superheated vents. These underwater oases supported life forms that existed nowhere else on Earth: bacteria that fed on chemicals rather than sunlight, translucent fish with their own bioluminescent organs, and creatures so alien they seemed like visitors from another planet. "It was my 3rd month on the station," Elena recalls, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'd grown comfortable with the routine. The isolation, the pressure, the constant darkness outside, it becomes normal after a while." The research station was a marvel of engineering, with thick pressure-resistant walls, redundant life support systems, and viewing portals that offered glimpses into the alien world outside. The thermal vents created an otherworldly landscape of mineral formations and billowing clouds of superheated water. On the night everything changed. Elena was working the late shift, monitoring the external cameras and collecting data from their remote sensors. Her 5 colleagues were asleep in their quarters, and she was alone in the observation deck. That's when she noticed something unusual on the thermal imaging display. The vents had been stable for weeks, she explains. Same temperature, same output patterns. But that night, they started fluctuating. Not randomly, in patterns. Like someone was controlling them. As Elena watched, the thermal vents began to pulse in sequence, creating waves of heat that spread across the ocean floor in perfect geometric patterns. It was impossible. Thermal vents were geological features, driven by tectonic activity and magma flows. They couldn't be controlled. But the patterns were too precise to be natural. Elena activated all the external cameras, flooding the area around the station with artificial light. What she saw in those lights made her question her sanity. The sea floor around the thermal vents was covered with structures. Not natural rock formations, but constructed architecture. Smooth, curved surfaces that reflected their lights like polished metal. Towers and spires that rose from the depths, connected by what looked like bridges or walkways. "I thought it was a hallucination at first," Elena says. "Pressure psychosis, cabin fever, something like that. But the cameras were recording everything. It was real." As she watched, lights began to appear within the structures. Not the harsh white of their flood lamps, but soft, organic illumination that pulsed like a heartbeat. The entire underwater city, because that's what it was, a city, began to come alive. Elena fumbled for the communication system to wake her colleagues, but before she could activate it, something moved past one of the cameras. It was huge, at least the size of a blue whale, but it moved with purpose and intelligence. As it passed through the camera's field of view, Elena caught glimpses of its features. An elongated body covered in what looked like scales that shifted between translucent and opaque, multiple limbs or tentacles that manipulated objects with delicate precision, and most disturbing of all, what appeared to be technology integrated into its body. Biomechanical augmentations that pulsed with the same organic light as the city below. "That's when I realized we weren't alone down there," Elena whispers. "We'd been watched, studied. The thermal vents, the ecosystems we thought we were discovering, they were being managed, controlled." More creatures emerged from the city, dozens of them, moving with coordinated purpose. They seemed to be preparing something. The thermal vents increased their output, creating columns of superheated water that rose like pillars toward the research station. Elena watched in growing terror as the creatures began to ascend, following the thermal columns toward their station. They moved through the crushing pressure and extreme heat as if it were nothing, their biomechanical enhancements allowing them to thrive in conditions that would instantly destroy any known Earth life. As they drew closer, Elena could see details that filled her with cosmic dread. The creatures weren't entirely alien. They had features that looked disturbingly familiar. Faces that might once have been human, limbs that had been modified and extended, eyes that held intelligence and memory. They were looking directly at her through the camera feeds. Elena's hands shook as she finally managed to activate the station's emergency protocol, flooding the crew quarters with red light and blaring alarms. Her colleagues stumbled from their bunks, confused and disoriented. "What's happening?" shouted Dr. Chen, the expedition leader. Elena pointed at the camera displays, but the screens showed only normal deep-sea terrain. The city was gone. The creatures had vanished. Even the thermal vents had returned to their normal, steady output. There was. Elena struggled to explain what she'd witnessed. The crew spent the next hour reviewing the camera recordings, but they found nothing. The digital files showed only routine footage of the seafloor, thermal vents, and occasional fish. Whatever Elena had seen, it hadn't been recorded. Pressure hallucination, Dr. Chen concluded. It happens to the best of us down here. The isolation, the stress, your mind fills in the blanks with impossible things. But Elena knew what she'd seen was real. And 3 days later, she found proof. During a routine maintenance check of the station's exterior, the robotic arm cameras detected something attached to the hull. Something that shouldn't exist at that depth and pressure. A device of unknown origin, made from materials that their spectrometers couldn't identify. The device was roughly cylindrical, about the size of a coffee can, and covered in symbols that looked almost like writing. But more disturbing was its function. It was clearly some kind of monitoring equipment, positioned to observe the inside of their station. "We'd been watched," Elena says, her voice hollow. "For who knows how long, they'd been studying us just like we thought we were studying them." The research station was evacuated within 48 hours. The official report cited equipment malfunction and crew psychological stress, but Elena knows the truth. Before they left, she managed to access the station's deep storage drives, the backup systems that recorded everything whether the main computers were active or not. The footage was there. All of it. The city, the creatures, the biomechanical beings that had once been human. But it was classified immediately upon their return to the surface, buried in government archives where it would never see the light of day. Elena left marine biology entirely and now works as a librarian in a small town in Montana. But sometimes, late at night, she receives emails with no sender address. The emails contain oceanographic data, temperature readings, current patterns, sonar imagery of deep-sea trenches around the world. The data shows the same thing in location after location. Cities in the deep, structures that shouldn't exist, and thermal signatures that suggest massive populations of something living in the darkest parts of our oceans. "They're not hiding anymore," Elena tells me, showing me printouts of the mysterious data. "The cities are growing, spreading. And those creatures, I think they were human once. Adapted, changed, augmented to survive in the deep. But they remember what they used to be." She pauses, staring at a sonar image that shows geometric structures rising from an oceanic trench near Japan. "I think they're preparing for something. And I don't think we're going to like what it is." The ocean remains our planet's greatest mystery. In those crushing depths where no sunlight penetrates, entire civilizations could exist without our knowledge. The 3 people whose stories I've shared tonight all experienced something that changed their understanding of what lies beneath the waves. Dr. Sarah Chen, Tommy Reeves, and Dr. Elena Vasquez. 3 professionals who dedicated their lives to exploring the deep, only to discover that the deep was exploring them right back. Their stories raise disturbing questions about what intelligence might lurk in the abyss, and whether humanity's expansion into the ocean depths is as welcome as we'd like to believe. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories that will make you question what really lurks in the darkness beyond our understanding.